Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa has reaffirmed the ANC's position on the mandate of the Reserve Bank. He issued a statement late yesterday clarifying the party's position on the matter and also describing conflicting statements made by party officials as not helpful. Earlier this week, Ramaphosa met with CEOs of more than 20 state-owned enterprises to discuss their contribution to the economy. Now, that meeting came just days after two CEOs of two parastatals resigned. Dr. Rendani Ralinala joins us now from our Pretoria studios to help discuss and unpack and further analyze some of the stories that made headlines this week. Dr. Ralinala, thanks so much for speaking to us. Good morning.
Morning, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks. So let's get into these stories. So how important was it for President Cyril Ramaphosa to issue the statement that he did yesterday about the Reserve Bank, especially since some people have accused him of being silent? It took him 3 whole days to respond to this.
You know, it is important that as the president of the country, you have to provide policy clarity. You will remember that the president of the country is the president of the ANC, and therefore the ANC had a likhutla. And there were certain policy positions taken by the party. But some of those policy positions taken by the party are being blown out of proportion by some leaders within the ANC in public. And in that regard, it was critical for the ANC president and also the president of the country to provide that clarity publicly, specifically because when it comes to the Reserve Bank, it is a central bank and it has got a particular independence in terms of its act. And in that regard, whatever goes on or whatever gets said, in as far as the Reserve Bank is concerned, it does affect the inflation in the country, it does affect the fluctuation of the rand and so on, and also investor confidence. And in that regard, any recklessness in the manner in which people articulate statements has to be corrected, and unfortunately it has to be done by the president himself, because by virtue of being a president, he carries that kind of stature that get respected by the markets.
So if we take a look at the ANC's position and we go back to the NASREC conference and the resolutions around the South African Reserve Bank, the issue here is, of course, that the president, he stated, as was resolved in NASREC, that it is an anomaly that our central bank is actually privately owned by people outside of this country. So the ANC has resolved that the government will develop a proposal to ensure full public ownership in a manner that does not benefit private shareholders, and that was a resolution of the ANC. Then you have the Secretary General talking about quantitative easing as well. So clearly those positions are not necessarily contradictory, but they do speak to perhaps somewhat of an amendment or, a change to the mandate, or at least the ownership of the Reserve Bank. So why is it so difficult for the ANC to come out clearly and articulate that position?
You know, you need to look at the reasons behind why people are saying the Reserve Bank's mandate must be extended. Firstly, there is a misconception within the ANC that a Reserve Bank can be a bank that is used to stimulate growth and also to create employment. And that is a very fallacious statement and position. That, in fact, has dominated the ANC discussions in NASREC during the policy conference, during the national conference. Now, the fact of the matter is that the ANC must accept that there are institutions set to stimulate growth, and there are institutions set to stimulate employment. If you also look at the current cabinet reconfiguration, you will definitely see that some of those configurations are intended to stimulate growth, because, in fact, within the ANC and the ruling party itself, there are people who understand that it is not the mandate of the Reserve Bank to stimulate growth, and it is not the mandate of the Reserve Bank to create employment. Yes, in terms of the ownership, there is a concern And one can concede that the ownership of the Reserve Bank must also include the locals. But that by merely transforming the ownership of the Reserve Bank, you are going to stimulate growth and create employment. I think that is far-fetched. But I think the key issue is that,
But given how this is played out in the public domain, what does this say about the ANC? What does this say about the state of the party, and especially at top leadership level, when you have the president and some of the other NEC members coming out on one side of an argument, the SG coming out on another side? What does this tell us about where the ANC is at right now?
The truth of the matter is that the ANC is a party in turmoil, clearly, simple stated, because it is very abnormal that you will have top leadership of the ANC issuing conflicting statements. And this did not start with this particular issue only, but it has been happening for quite a while. Wherein you will remember that during the elections there has been a huge contest in terms of who contributed more for the ANC to get votes and so on and so on. But the bottom line is that the ANC is just a party that is in turmoil because of the whole camps that have been created post 2007. And these camps have continued politically to dominate within the ANC, and therefore it does affect its policy positions, and it also affects the relationship within the leadership of the ANC. That is why you will find that the ANC president will have his own people that supported him before the Nasrec conference. Then you have got the SG, who was part of the Zuma camp, the Nkosazana Zuma camp. And unfortunately, the ANC is unable so far to heal these divisions and come together and live in unity as they try to pronounce. So every time you get sparks politically from these leaders that demonstrate that there is a huge differentiation in terms of policy positions.
Dr. Ralinala, earlier this week, we also saw the resignation of Vuyani Jagana as SAA CEO. Now, when he joined the airline, it seemed as if there was some hope for SAA, given his credentials and also his seeming dedication to turning around the airline's financial situation. But then we saw his resignation. And the nice thing here, I suppose, is that he actually revealed that he was frustrated by the lack of support and the slow progress that was being made. What's your take on what's generally happening at the country's SOEs, given the resignation of Phakamani Hadebe as well at Eskom?
Yes, you will remember that the problem of the parastatals in South Africa has been dragging on for quite a while. And firstly, it has been the lack of governance stability, wherein you will find that when the ministers change and therefore the board changes and then the CEOs changes and so on and so on. Now, that, of course, if you also go back to the state capture inquiry, you will come up with pieces of evidence that suggest that these parastatals or SOEs were the main victims. And in that regard, there is conflicting interests there. There are people whom I'm very convinced that they are not actually prepared to see them prosper because they are benefiting from these SOEs. And now, any CEO who will try so much to ensure that there is a movement in terms of improving the governance, improving the performance of those SOEs, will definitely be frustrated from certain quarters. And it is unfortunate that this has affected many SOEs. But I think the other issue that we must also understand is that some of these CEOs, when they took over these SOEs were already bleeding. And sometimes it's very difficult because they are relying more on the government backup. And now, when you have got change of ministers also in the National Treasury, some of them come in and they say, look, we are going to tighten the belt and therefore we are not going to be giving you guarantees that you need for you to operate. But I think the fundamental problem that most of our SOEs have is that we have to turn them into proper state businesses that actually generate revenue.
But how are you going to do that, given that they are bleeding? Some of them seem beyond redemption at this stage. And also, if you can just touch on the fact that accusations have been leveled against Minister Pravin Gordhan since the resignation of these CEOs. What do you think is actually going on here?
Look, I think the key issue is that you will remember that there has always been tensions between the minister and some of the CEOs in these parastatals. But I think one does share some frustrations that probably Pravin Gordhan might have as a minister, especially because of the troubles that affect the society. And he has got a political reputation to maintain. And now, sometimes as a politician, he will make certain interventions that might not look very supportive to the CEOs. And these CEOs will get frustrated and they will think maybe the best way is for me to leave. But I think similarly, the issue is that the problem is more deeper than the personalities that are there. If you look at, for example, SAA, for example, there are core areas and then there are non-core areas. If you look at ESCOM, similarly, there are core areas and non-core areas. If you then look at Transnet, there are no core areas and non-core areas. It is important that some of those areas that are non-core have to be privatized, unfortunately, if you really want these SOEs to be turned around. Yes, I'm aware that the ANC is trying to pussyfooty around the issue of privatizing some of these SOEs. And one would strike a balance and actually even think that it will be much better and progressive for the ANC if they want to turn around these SOEs, to privatize some of the non-core assets, because those non-core assets are the ones that are making these SOEs to bleed. And in that regard, it becomes very difficult for them to generate revenue for our country. And it is important that the privatization debate should not be avoided. People must face it.
All right.
Because there's no way in which you can simply just pump in money for an enterprise that is not generating any revenue.
Well, thank you so much for your insights there and talking to us of about some of the key developments this week. That was political analyst Dr. Rendani Ralinala on some of those headline-making stories. Let's go to a break. On the other side of that, we'll have your latest news.